That one's slow. Mine's on time, and we're a minute past, so. I'm gonna call this meeting of our public hearing of the Rockport Select Board to order for Thursday, September 8th. The first part of this is the public hearing portion on the 4 articles that we are considering placing on the November warrant. The first 2 are land use ordinances. The third one is the library bond request, and the fourth one is the request from Midco Solid Waste for a contract. And I will explain these as we get to them. The way this will work is I will open the public hearing on a particular article. I'll read as much of the article as I think is necessary. And then I will ask for anyone who wishes to speak in favor of, if anyone wishes, and then after they're done, anyone wishing to speak opposed to, and after that's done, then if anyone wishes to speak neither for nor against. I will then close that part of the public hearing and open it for the next article, and we'll go through that same procedure. So effectively, we'll do the same thing 4 times. After the 4th public hearing, we will then go into our own session and have our discussion, first on whether or not to place it on the warrant, and then second on what the recommendation is that we want to make on those. And we've just heard from the attorney, we do not make a recommendation on the Midco Solid Waste article, but that's just an issue, tweaking of the way we've been doing business. So, are we clear on what we're doing here? All right. Then I'm going to open the public hearing on Article 2. Shall an ordinance entitled, quote, ordinance amending the Town of Rockport Road Acceptance Ordinance to allow requests that the town take ownership of private roads or portions of private roads to be presented to the voters after 25% of the abutting lots are developed, provided that any such private road or portion of private road creates a new linkage between 2 existing public roads and other conditions are met. End of quote, be enacted, question mark. So with that, I will open the public hearing. Does anyone wish to speak in favor of the article that I just read? Yes, please. We are being live streamed, and so people at home, I hope, will be watching, or they can watch it in subsequent days. So we will ask everybody, if you want to say anything, to please step to the podium.
There we go. Thank you very much. I'm John Duke. I live on Hawthorne Drive in Rockport, obviously, and this has been an issue that has taken a long time. I've been a resident of Hawthorne Drive for just under 5 years, coming up this October. And the quest to have this discussion has taken nearly that amount of time. So thank you for providing this opportunity to have this conversation. A lot of work has gone into this. A number of members of the board here, the Ordinance Review Committee, staff, Jamie, Rick, department heads have been very helpful in trying to craft something that really solves an issue that is, yes, individual to our neighborhood, but I think is pretty universal and really discussed farther beyond the reaches of our road. Being a private road, one that connects 2 public roads, it's something where we've seen fire trucks go through, police cars go through, public works cars, trucks go through, and the common sense test alone, it seemed to make sense that this is something that the town should be able to at least consider. Not to accept it wholeheartedly, but to allow for the consideration of the voters. And this opportunity here, by making this change, provides the town the opportunity to have that conversation. This does not endorse any single road to become a town road. It doesn't do anything of the sort. It provides that opportunity to happen. And this is a 10-year-old problem. We created this ordinance as a town 10 years ago. It solved a purpose at that time, but as we've all seen, the world around us has changed greatly in 10 years. And so I think that the solution we have before us here not only meets the needs of today, but looks ahead in the town that we're trying to become and we're trying to grow into. I would urge the board and the larger community to look harder at this issue, look at how we consider roads at the planning board stage, our road sections of our subdivision ordinance, they need also to be looked at, because there's so much, as we've had this conversation, the number of us who've been involved in this, there's so much of this that could come back to, before an applicant even comes before the planning board, that many of these issues could be resolved, whether it's through bonding or what have you. So we're in this donut hole situation where we were in a subdivision approved before this ordinance went into effect and fell into where we are now. And so I hope that the work will continue to look at this issue using all the knowledge we've all gained over these past few years. And I appreciate the support we've gotten so far, and hope you all will support this in a few minutes. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak in favor of this ordinance? Hearing none. Does anyone, oh.
She's my neighbor. I'm Jared Cronkite. I live at 6 Winding Way in Rockport. I also have the Edward Jones office in Rockport, and I'm on the Investor Policy Committee for the town. Bill's the brains on that, not me. I just participate. So I would just ask you guys to consider it so the voters can make the decision. I'm always a big believer that the voters should be able to participate. My biggest concern is the school bus situation, that the school bus can't cross over through Hawthorne currently. Last year we had low snowfall, so we didn't have a big problem. If we have a lot of snowfall this coming year, we're gonna have some issues with that school bus turning around in the cul-de-sac at the end of Winding Way. So I you know, Terry's the bus driver. He's doing a great job with what he has, but we had as you know, an exceptional year with low snowfall. So I don't see that continuing into the future. So I would just ask, and if he can't turn around down there, then my concern is all the kids are going to be up on Old County Road waiting for the bus on a busy road where people are going back and forth to Walmart, which is exceptionally dangerous situation. So I would ask that you'd consider to put it forward so the voters can have a conversation, make a good decision. And I think it is a safety issue. And I think from a cost standpoint, they're already plowing on 2 adjacent roads. You're just going down another one. It's not a big cost issue, so thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Heather Mackey. I live on Chickawaukee Pond Road, and I am surrounded by all of this, although not in direct. But the bus is an impact for us and has been an impact longer than any of those guys. And we are down at the end where the bus turns around currently, and I do exactly agree with Mr. Cronkite's remarks there. I did need to call last year to Public Works to ask them to push it back once, even last year, because it was getting a little tight for the turnaround. Right now, the bus pushes into the trees and an old basketball hoop that's sitting there and pushes right back into them in order to make that turn around. It's a known, again, and just to say on the, so I'm in support of this. I'd like to urge you to say yes to this, whatever you need to do tonight. Also, the common sense test, it's a cut through. People are using it. The Bay Ridge folks are coming from their mailbox to go to Walmart through there, and other vehicles are regularly using that, so it's kind of assumed it is, so there you go.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Richard Nightingale, and I would urge that you pass this, but a little background behind it. I think this project has been approved for more than 10, 15 years now. Went before the planning board, met all specs for a public road. And I think you've seen letters from the school department and so forth. It is a safety thing. If you're coming down Old County Road, you're coming over the crest of a hill. Water runs downhill, and that is an icy spot. So coming on to Winding Way, the bus has to go down, come back out onto Old County Road, go back around up Bay Ridge, They're making 4 trips, I believe, which you've seen letters from the superintendent of the schools in the past. I think you've seen reports that all the inspections were done, and this was taken before the Board of Selectmen once before, sponsored by Mr. Peabody, Steve Beveridge, and Mr. Ford. And I understand that it wasn't even heard. I don't know if that's true or not. I found out about it 2 months later after I found out. So, all the paperwork is in. And I think if you're worried about taxes, the way to increase taxes is put a few more houses in there. And that's gonna help everyone. I don't believe that this is hurting the people of Rockport at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak in favor?
My name is Bob Duke. I live on Hugh Street currently, but I will be a future resident of this neighborhood that they're talking about on Ashley Terrace, is it, right now? I promise not to be as long-winded as my son. So I would just like to say, as a select board member, when the ordinance was passed to create the 50% rule, there was a lot of impetus to control development at the time. There were a lot of subdivisions. They were getting to the final stages and those final roads. And I remember the discussion was that we wanted to make that rule happen, good or bad. In this particular case, though, it really comes down to the common sense of the fact that Hawthorne Drive and Ashley Terrace are roads that are caught between 2 public roads. And the school is one thing, but I was just counting houses on that road currently built, and I know there are 2 more. I believe there's gonna be 7 houses between those 2 roads very shortly. So you're well above the 25% right now. I would just hope that you guys have the common sense at least to put it out to the voters to approve it. So that's all I got to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak in favor of this article? Hearing none. Does anyone wish to speak in opposition to this article? Then does anyone wish to speak neither for nor against this article?
Chairperson, Chapman, members of the Select Board, I'm Michael Miller, and I live on Pine Bray Lane. So I am speaking in favor in part, and in opposition in part to Article 2, the ordinance amending the road acceptance ordinance. I'm in favor of any ordinance that provides a process for Rockport citizens living along a private road to seek acceptance of that road by the town. Town roads don't only serve the residents that live on them. Take the case of a local surgeon who works at Penn Bay, for example. That road that he or she lives on serves not just the surgeon's family, their friends, but also every citizen who receives their services. Your current definition for a public way is that it's an area or strip of land designated and held by the town of Rockport for the passage and use of the general public by motor vehicle. And I contend that just about every private road that's part of a subdivision does that. I actually had thought that the proposed ordinance was limited to those that were connecting two lanes, so I had a lot more to say about that particular piece. But I'll jump to the point about Pine Bray Lane. So I live, and if you talk about a donut hole, Pine Bray Lane is a much bigger problem than just a donut hole. And I don't know if the members of the Select Board are aware of the tortured history of the Hammond Bray subdivision, which started way back in 1990. It went through 3 phases. It went through waivers on the steepness of the grade of the road, but now there are 20 people who have lots on that road who are struggling every year to get a plowing contract and who had to spend extra money this year to make capital improvements to the road. So the residents that live on Pine, there's 22 members and lot owners that currently live on that private road. And there's 2 lot owners actually in that subdivision that don't even live on the road, but are on the outsides of a conservation easement. And that conservation easement is meant to be for the members of the public. So how are they gonna get to that conservation easement? They have to use Pine Bray Lane to get there. So, you know, there's a lot that goes on with respect to having the decision between a private road and a public road. So the point that I want to make, besides the costs and the struggles that our neighborhood association has had with respect to the cost, I mean, we started the first year that this was an association, the dues and the cost of maintaining that road was $404. And I know you're concerned about costs, but every single member of that association and everybody who lives on that road pays their taxes, pays the same mill rate. We just don't have the benefit of getting all the town services. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, because I didn't actually see the actual acceptance ordinance, the way that you have it phrased in the public hearing notice is that the primary part is the connection of the 2 pieces, then you have also with certain other conditions. Well, in looking at the ordinance, certain other conditions, you've added a requirement in section 505, that you're now gonna have a recommendation, the threshold requirements in 400, which is the 50% rule or the 25% rule, depending on where you are, and then also the connection to the municipal road, which has to be in a manner acceptable to the Public Works Director, and that sounds a little vague to me. I'm not quite sure what that means, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and how is anybody gonna know whether they're gonna meet that threshold. But putting that aside, if you look at section 505, you have your review and recommendation by you folks, and we really appreciate the work that you do and the fact that you spend a lot of time in doing this, but then you have with that, you're gonna have a recommendation from the Public Works Director, the Fire Chief, and the Police Chief as to whether or not acceptance of it should be, and then would be in the best interest of the town for public safety and/or road maintenance reasons. And that, again, also sounds to me like it's a way for you to decline a road, that you're gonna make it, you're putting a hurdle in there for us if we seek the opportunity. If the members of our association want to put and do what we have to do to get in front of you, we've already had it made very difficult as it is by having the steep grade for Pine Bray Lane that went through 2 waivers with your planning board. And that's not the homeowners that did that. That was a courtesy to the developer. And so now the homeowners are stuck with a road that they have to put a lot of money into to get even close to town standards. So my point is simply this. I'm in favor of anything that makes it easier for these private roads where you have a significant number of Rockport citizens living on it. Anything that makes it easier for them to get the town to vote on it, I'm in favor of it. I hope you guys get your vote. But I also think that there's others like ourselves, and we were in the same group. We went through this whole process before that ordinance was passed. And now we're struggling to find a plowing contract this year again. And you may remember that because I actually wrote to you in 2013 pleading, and I didn't even get a response to the letter, not even an acknowledgement. So I'm just before you today, and I hope you will consider that. Thank you.
I'll apologize for not having a response. I thought a response was sent. Yeah, but
You know,
I'll take your word.
myself-
Yep,
It was
yep.
myself and another resident, and neither one of us
Okay.
got a response.
Okay.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
Does anyone else wish to speak neither for nor against? In that case, I will close this portion of the public hearing and move to Article 3. Shall an ordinance entitled, quote, "Ordinance repealing the Town of Rockport Sidewalk Ordinance," end of quote, be enacted, question mark. And with that, I will open the public hearing on this one. Does anyone wish to speak in favor of this ordinance? Hearing no one, does anyone wish to speak in opposition to this ordinance change? And hearing none, does anyone wish to speak neither for nor against? Would you please come up and tell us your name?
And your town?
I'll take the fifth.
Jeff, before you
Jeff's
speak,
got-
before you speak, this is a public hearing, and in a public hearing, anyone who is in the public can speak. That's the rule. We can't limit it like we can at town meeting, where it is the legislative body that are the ones who are able to speak without special exceptions. So, with that,
Thank you. Jeff Scott, Chair of the Pathways Committee, and I live in Camden. And the Pathways Committee discussed this last night, and this ordinance, and we really didn't come to any real conclusions about it. We helped draft and contributed to the rewrite of the actual ordinance. And then we just learned, I think, 2 or 3 nights ago, that there was this consideration for dropping the ordinance. So our immediate response was, my goodness, this is an ordinance that should guide the town with respect to important pedestrian facilities. And without that, there's no guidance. The fallback to that, our understanding is that we have the guidance of the Pathways Master Plan, which was accepted and adopted by the Select Board, thank you very much, and also the Comprehensive Plan. And both of those documents incorporate language not unlike what's in the existing, well, it's a little different than the proposed amended ordinance. And I think what the Select Board is thinking, or what possibly is thinking, that the public could be thinking, is that without the ordinance, then we have these guiding principles within our comp plan and within the master plan. And our thinking is, those are guiding documents. Those are not like ordinances. Ordinances guide us almost like law, and the way the community works. And also it guides the town. Sure, the sidewalks are mostly town-created works, but I'm just looking at this prior ordinance, and this ordinance has a lot to do with about how the town should work towards embracing or adopting existing facilities. The Pathways Committee agrees that the current wording of the ordinance isn't great. And we thought Ken and I think there was input by Helen Shaw, she's on our committee too. We did a lot of work in improving it. And we think that would be better, a better solution. Or if not that, then the Pathways Committee wants to be reassured. I don't know how to say this. It's just this sort of this feeling like, hey, we don't have this guiding principle anymore, and that's not a good idea. So what we could do is, if the town rejects this, possibly through the vote, through the warrant article, then what we'll have to do is, we'll have to recreate another one. We'll be compelled to do so, which we'd have to do, and then I guess, would it come up and have to be another warrant article to adopt the new ordinance?
if there are a change, yes.
Well, if there was none existing.
If this passed.
If this was passed,
Yeah.
then we'd have to
Repealed.
start
Yeah.
from zero again.
Start from scratch.
Yeah, and that's sort of where we were. We sort of chewed it around a little bit, and it just feels we feel a little rudderless if we don't have that ordinance there. Yeah, and I don't know how to guide the discussion any more than that. So that's why I was neither for nor against. But it feels, my gut feels that it's not a good thing, unless the select board put a caveat on it that said something like, with the provision that our plans are to create a new and put together a new ordinance, something like that. Yeah. And we haven't had time enough to investigate other towns. Camden, because we're a two-town committee, I don't believe Camden has a specific ordinance, and it may be strong enough in the subdivision ordinance, which is part of the rationale for why we don't need a sidewalk ordinance here. But I think we need to do a little more investigation just in Camden.
So I have a quick question for Jeff. One of the things that gave some of us comfort in
Yes.
allowing this ordinance to go away, because obviously at some point there was value to it, was the fact that you chaired a committee that was very successful and very strong in bringing to light and enlightening people on good, proper, sensible methodology, but as well as overarching philosophy about sidewalks. Do you huh? You're retiring? Oh no, leadership is gone. On a serious question, do you feel that your committee has in the past lived up to this particular notion and would be willing to be strong in the future with sidewalk questions?
I think the answer to that is the same as the question we had, which is the current select board is very supportive of pedestrian bicycle infrastructure. We're worried about 5 or 10 years from now, which may not be the same situation. And it may be the same way in the Pathways Committee. We don't know where that's going to be. So the more we have written and guiding future leaders, that's where that comfort level comes from, Jeff.
Thank you.
Ken, did you want to address any of the points that he made?
I think I'll save it for our
Okay.
discussion.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak neither for nor against? Come on up.
Tom Murphy, Planning Board, Rockport. One of the concerns that we had on the Planning Board, even though we voted to recommend the passage of this article, is that in looking at site plan on parcels that had sidewalks in them, you look at it site by site rather than looking at the whole totality of the sidewalk and connecting to other things. So if you were to have a new place go out on Route 90 and you could talk about a pathway or a sidewalk or something out front or something here in the village with an existing sidewalk and you were to have an issue, wouldn't that make sense to apply it to the other sites along there? It needs to be looked at as a whole and have a new ordinance drafted in such a way that it makes sense in reviewing site plans on a piece-by-piece basis, though looking at it as a whole.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry.
Oh.
I yield. Go ahead.
Just a follow-up question then. Did I understand correctly that in spite of supporting the passage of this ordinance, you would prefer to see another ordinance?
Something that is more than just a guiding document. That's one of the things that we've always looked at in the planning board. And you can talk about the comp plan, you can talk about the guiding language in an ordinance, but that doesn't have the teeth of the ordinance itself.
Wouldn't that come more into play then with the site plan review? As,
Right.
you know, going through the whole area like you were talking
But
about.
the thing
there.
is that when, like, you're doing the Shepherd Block or Union Hall or something like that, you don't look at the whole sidewalk. The application is limited to just that part of the sidewalk. So if you were working on the Shepherd Block and you could say, you know, we really need to have stairs with a railing at the end down by Union Hall, the applicants say, well, that's not on our site. You can't talk about that. And you can't because it's not on the site. Each site plan has its own site-specific requirements, and you can't talk about things as a whole. It's like doing town planning and thinking about things regionally. But you're a town. You need to look at the best interests of your town, not the entire region.
So, quick question. In your recent years on the planning board, have you felt that this ordinance allowed you to command a sidewalk infrastructure even though adjacent properties are not yet, have not yet been in a position where you had to, where they were forced to do that? Or have you said because of the adjacency and or perhaps the weakness of the existing sidewalk ordinance, you didn't have an opportunity to build towards the future?
I think that the ordinance was weak in that it did not allow you to build toward the future. I mean, if somebody came forward and had money and wanted to do something like building steps down at Union Hall, we're like, great, we're all for it. That sounds wonderful. But you weren't looking at things as a totality. And because of the site-specific nature of site plans and site plan review, you can't. It doesn't work that way. So that would be something that the select board and the pathways committee and the planning board and the ORC could think about and look at other towns and how their language works and, or doesn't work, to see how it could be better structured so that if you are working on a site where a sidewalk will eventually go through, you could say, you need to reserve this for this.
Somebody has to start.
I mean, is
start it
part
rolling.
of it in the public, is the sidewalk fully in the public way? Or if it's not in the public way, do you donate it, or is there an easement? I mean, there's all kinds of weird, sticky things to think about. And the current ordinance doesn't go as far as it needs to.
I remind you, and this is for the audience, the initial draft of the Ordinance Review Committee's winter work plan will be starting to be assembled next Thursday night, 5 o'clock. I think it's going to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that would be one place to introduce the concepts that you're talking about.
That would be to the select board. The ORC works at the direction of the
Yeah.
select board, not the planning board. We can make suggestions to the select board, and then they can work at your direction. I would hope that a sidewalk ordinance that is neatly tailored to allow the things that I'm speaking about for the best of the town be looked at. And considering we've operated the way we have for as long as we have, repealing what we have in November, fixing it and putting it on in June or the next November, it's not going to make a huge difference whether it goes away or not.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak neither for nor against?
Linda Clancy, Penn Bay Pilot. I'm just wondering if somebody from Ordinance Review Committee or you guys could just give a quick summation of how this came to be on the, proposed for the warrant?
I guess I can
Okay.
handle that one. This sidewalk ordinance was adopted, I think, in the mid-90s. And for the last number of years, it has been basically ignored. People didn't even know it existed. It was found when we were considering the high sidewalk repair and also the possibility of a sidewalk on Summer Street. And looking at the ordinance, by the way, was also crafted prior to the existence of the Pathways Committee. And we had to dig it out. Will Gartley found the ordinance and realized that it had somewhat onerous requirements, which may have had the potential to derail sidewalk projects and not allow them to go forward. I took a look at the ordinance then and got my red pen out and went through it and changed it. In looking at the sidewalk master plan, which was adopted by this board on the recommendation of the Pathways Committee, went through and made a bunch of changes. The Pathways Committee vetted it and looked at that. And then, even as I was doing that, I was looking at some things in here which were, in my opinion, not necessarily ordinance-type things. For example, the requirement to plow the sidewalks in the wintertime. That's a budget decision that's made by the Budget Committee and by the voters of the town every year, and so that perhaps didn't belong in the ordinance. Other parts of the ordinance, the petition method of getting a sidewalk had all kinds of problems. First of all, it was a provision that had never been invoked and wasn't likely to be invoked. To make it shorthand, basically a group of residents who wanted a sidewalk in front of their homes could petition the select board to get it. The select board, if they voted for it, would say, okay, fine, you can have a sidewalk, but then the residents had to pay for it, and according to this ordinance, had to pay for the maintenance and upkeep of that sidewalk. Now you've got a situation where you're compelling residents to pay for upkeep of an infrastructure item which lies within the public way, which is a very problematic situation. So the bottom line, I think, in the end, is that the ordinance, even with our trying to work around it, it doesn't work right now. And I don't have any problem at all, as Mr. Murphy talked about, or others, or Mr. Scott as well, you know, let's get this one off the books, and then let's start over again and do something new and get something on there that makes a little bit more sense with the Pathways Committee now in mind and that sort of thing. I don't believe that repealing this ordinance is going to stop sidewalk construction in Rockport. In fact, it may even enhance it. And I don't know that keeping the ordinance is going to make sidewalk construction go any more quickly. I think our Pathways Committee has done an excellent job in pushing forward projects, and we're seeing the result of that now with the reconstruction of the high sidewalk, the sidewalk going out toward West Street Extension onto Route 90, and the crossing there at Route 1. So that's a brief history, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And Jamie, who is staff and helped work on this, might have some comments as well.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak neither for nor against? Then I'll close this part of the public hearing and go to Article 4. And this is one where I'm not going to read the whole thing because there's a lot of dollar signs and stuff down in there, but I will read the critical part, and then I will also mention another suggested change that we might want to make to the wording. The wording I'm going to read right now is what was on the public hearing notice. Article 4, to see if the town will vote to, paragraph 1, approve the design, construction, and equipping of a new library building at 1 Lime Rock Street, including demolition of existing improvements on the property and other site work, in parenthesis, the, quote, project, end quote. Paragraph 2, appropriate a sum not to exceed $2 million for the cost of the project. Paragraph 3, to fund the appropriation in number 2 above and provide that the town has received donation commitments. Provided the town has received donation commitments or funds from other revenue sources in an amount at least as large as $2 million, authorize the treasurer and the chairman of the select board to issue, at one time or from time to time, general obligation securities of the town of Rockport, Maine, including temporary notes in anticipation of the sale thereof and future refunding obligations in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $2 million, and to delegate to the treasurer and chairman of the select board the authority and discretion to fix the dates, maturities, denominations, interest rates, places of payment, calls for redemption, current or advance refundings of the securities, forms, and other details of said securities, including execution and delivery of said securities against payment therefore, execution of certificates, loan agreements, and any other documents reasonably related thereto, and to provide for the sale thereof. From here on, it's the financial statement. We, on the select board, had asked if there could be some way in here, a phrase or a clause or something that would limit the amount of time that would be permitted to have the $2 million of private funds to be raised. And the attorney came back to us today and did make a suggestion that would meet the legal requirements, though the attorney also suggested that we not do this. But in the third paragraph, it would start out to say, to fund the appropriation in 2 above and provided the town has received donation commitments or funds from other revenue sources in an amount at least as large as $2 million, and here's the new part, by no later than December 31st, 2019, and then it continues on as I had read before. We will have to make that determination when we vote on the final wording, if we vote to have this.
Does it make sense to flip that discussion in the sense that the citizens here would be commenting on the first version where there's the possibility of the second version being passed? Doesn't it make sense for us to decide this first and then have public comment on whichever way we decided?
Well, the reason, I'm going to ask and then I'll come to you. The reason I decided to read that part in here was because I also want to hear what the public has to say on this as guidance to which way we go.
That's all I was gonna say.
That's what I was gonna say too, is let's have the public input there. That's what the hearing's.
Not only are you better looking, but you're smarter than I am.
Hey, I get my hair cut. Both of them. Both of them. Okay, come on, we gotta be, this is serious.
Talking to me, Bill.
Oh, he is,
He's talking
okay.
to me.
All right. So, I read it. I will now open the public hearing. Does anyone wish to speak in favor of this warrant article? And if you wish to speak to either of the two versions, that would be perfectly acceptable too. So, I open the public hearing. Does anyone wish to speak in favor of this bond article? Okay.
I wish to speak in favor of this bond article. I would like for you to say yes and pass it, and put it on the agenda to be voted on in November. It's a great process, a great product we put forth, put a lot of time and effort into it. It's going to be great. Do it.
Okay, thank you.
Heather Mackey.
Yep,
Heather Mackey.
thank you. Does anyone, I see a hand back there. Please come on up.
I'm Cheryl Lichty. I live over on Spruce Street and have lived here for about 10 years. And I just wanted to speak in favor of this in the sense that the library discussion has obviously been a very vigorous discussion for at least the last 3 years in terms of talking about building a new library, keeping it in the site that it's at versus RES, et cetera. And I think that although I was initially more enthusiastic about the use of the RES site, I think it's clear that the voters have chosen the existing site. I think it's also very clear that a compelling argument has been made for a much larger space for many, many good reasons, most of which have to do with us having a modern, multifunctional library in this community. And I think also a compelling argument was made with respect to the inability to use the current building in any circumstance. So now we're in a situation where, although we may be concerned about this cost in terms of the bond and what that means in terms of further increasing my tax bill, which I just received like everybody else in the mail the other day and was kind of in awe, it is, in terms of absolute numbers, small relative to the benefit for existing residents as well as residents in the future of this community. And I think it's very worth it. I also think it's important to note that this really is a true partnership in terms of the town versus private funding, or additional elective giving, I guess is the best way to put it. Some of that is going to come from Rockport residents, and I think it's fair to expect that some of that is going to come from residents of surrounding communities, foundations, and other groups. And I'm part of the group that is, going to be on the hook for raising another $2 million. In that vein, I would like to know what the goal of the select board is in setting a deadline for that fundraising, because that's actually something that I think those of us involved in raising that money have not heard until this evening.
It came about because we weren't sure how long it would take to raise the money, and if it goes on for 5, 6, 7 years, all of the financial components that go into this could be completely out of the window, and all of a sudden we're gonna, the interest rates have changed and things like that. And so we felt that it would be more assured, or giving better assurance to the public that this isn't gonna be something that would just keep dragging on, just waiting for that $2 millionth to be raised, and that put in some kind of a limit on what the period of time is that we would consider before we decide that, we need to go back and reevaluate, because the cost will change over a longer period of time. And that could impact a lot of it too.
I mean, I think there are a few things to consider in that, and I'm disturbed by the idea that this is coming up only now. But number one, I think everyone has a sense of urgency about raising this money and completing this project in a timely manner for many reasons. One of which is that I think we all need to be cognizant of the fact that I think we are spending approximately $40,000 a year renting a really unappealing, inadequate space. It's clear that there is that, and that's a financial driver that already exists basically in terms of getting this done. And also, I really, what do you mean by, well, we'll have to reevaluate it if we don't meet that deadline? Because if you set this deadline at the end of 2019 and then it's not met, which I don't really expect, by the way. I think those of us who've already started having preliminary discussions with people are very optimistic about the ability to raise this money. But if for some reason we didn't quite get to that mark by the end of 2019, I don't really know what kind of where you'd even start with reevaluation. And I hope that you guys can be very specific about that now, if that's the way you want this to read, because this has been an incredibly long process already. And to then turn around and say, well, actually, we're not going to build this building or something like that, it's hard to get your head around.
Ken first.
First of all, we're just considering this. It was a suggestion that came up at a prior meeting about a month ago, I think. And one of the reasons we thought about considering it, and perhaps you can speak to this, is that we thought that, some folks thought that perhaps the fundraising committee might do a little better with a finite period of time, not next month, obviously, but going out to speak to donors and saying, well, we have this period of time under which we have to raise the money, and it might actually be a tool that might be helpful for you folks. As far as what will we do if December 2019 rolls around and we haven't met that goal, that's 2.5 years away. And so.
But if you're going to put that language on a bond vote right now, I hope there's a really specific answer to that, actually, because
the answer
it's
to
not
that
that
is there
long.
can't be, because we don't
Yeah.
know what the economic situation will be then. Something may have come up in the interim that might, make us consider something a little bit different. I don't anticipate, I don't know whether I'll see you in the select board at that time, but I don't anticipate that we would throw the whole project out. But economic and other concerns could be very different 2.5 years from now than they are right now. So I can't really answer the question.
Yeah.
So
Brendan?
I just wanted to speak to your first question or your first statement. I can't remember which it was about
No.
how this phrasing came up, why this question came up, and I want to make sure, just for my own part, that the people in the room know that this is not a consensus. This does not reflect a consensus position or a decision. I fully expect you're about to witness an engaged discussion about whether or not this is a good idea.
At first glance, I would, and obviously the group that's involved in fundraising has to discuss it too, but personally I would say that it's very much in our interest to set goals and timelines, but I don't know that it's in our interest to have that defined by the bond vote language.
Rick?
And that really reflects what the attorney said as well. The board asked, is it possible to do that? And I asked the lawyer, and she advised against it for those very reasons, that it does, if we get to December 31st of 2019 and we do not have all the commitments, then we're done. And she is restricted from being able to allow us to issue the bond.
So, Rick, I would just say even that is highly conceptual. It helps, I think, if you say we have 98.5% of the commitments.
Then if you don't have 100%, if you don't have the $2 million, she
So
can't.
We'll get into this in a minute. For my part, I can't imagine why we would comprehend that.
Right. She recommended against it, and she said she did not think that this language was good to put in the bond article. I asked her to put it in there just so you could see what it would look like, fully expecting this conversation, but she recommended that it's not a good idea to put this language in.
And we will hold that conversation once we're done with the public hearing, but
For all
having
those
input
reasons.
like this is what helps us make our decisions. Jeff then wanted to.
I believe that I have to yield to Owen
I
first.
had the hand. So just to address that too, this is my first time seeing it as well. The only thing that comes to mind, I'm on the visioning committee for the middle school. When they took out renovations to the Mary Taylor building and renovations to the bus barn, the number that they were operating with when they proposed it previously was 29 million and some change. When they took those two things out, it dropped down to 23 million and some change. I came back to the next meeting, and the number in front of me was 26 million and change. It had grown about $3 million. And I asked, what did you all put back in here? And they said that was simply the increase in construction costs over time from when it was proposed last time to when it was going to be voted on next time. So that's some bit of those financial concerns that they're talking about. But I think that we'll probably have a really interesting conversation in a bit.
A conversation in which you'll find out that not all of our ideas are good ideas.
I've got Jan over here, and then back to you, Ms. Welch.
We're still in the fours, right?
Yes, this is still 4.
I'm Jan Rosenbaum. I live in Rockport, and I was not going to speak on this tonight because I am both chair of the committee that's bringing this the library to do and chair of the budget committee, and so I didn't want to speak on it. I am, of course, in favor of the warrant article and in favor of the library. I want to caution, though, right now it's 3.25 years to raise the money if we have a deadline. But at some point, it's going to be 90 days or 5 months to raise the remaining $200,000. I know occasionally I'll let a person on the phone talk to me long enough to get to the sales pitch where they say, you can have all of this, but you have to decide right now. And I don't want, and that's generally the point where I say, think not. I don't want to be in some brand new residence house at the far end of one of the lovely points in town, trying to raise the final couple of $100,000 and have to say to that person, we would like you to give $100,000. You can take 5 years to do it, but you got to decide right now. So I think that this is, I understand problems with construction costs. Things have been built into the architect's estimate on this. But I do think that an artificial deadline like that, even though now it's far away, it won't always be far away. And I think that it is just going to make more people rest less easily as time goes on. And we're not going to give our best pitch, and we're not going to get the library done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joan Welsh. I too am on the committee that is pledged to raise the funds for the library, and I really echo the good comments that Cheryl Lichty made. And I would say this library has been a long time coming. I'm very supportive of what we're doing now to move forward. It's a compromise. People who wanted it at RES, I think, understand the need for a library, and it has been decided it's going to be in its location now. Some people think it's too big. Some people think it's too small. I think it's a true compromise, and I really credit the ad hoc committee for the very hard work they did to adjust the plan and to address people's comments and concerns. I think they did a really good job. And I think it's really time for us as a community now to let's move forward. We've worked really hard on this. It's been a hard issue for our community. And I hope we can heal that and move forward, acknowledging that not everyone got all that they wanted, but this has the potential to be a really beautiful library to serve the many, many needs of our people in the community and beyond. I think we could be very proud of it. When it comes to setting a date to have the funds raised by, I think is a very bad idea. I've worked on a lot of capital campaigns, and you don't know what the economy is going to be. We would love, I talked with Charlton Ames about it last night. He's in Colorado. He couldn't be here tonight. He and I are co-chair of the committee, and we both feel that this would not, we would not be supportive of that idea. We really hope that we can raise this in the next 2 years. That's what we're going to be working hard on. We're already working, trying to find consultant help to help us with it. we're working now, hoping that this bond will pass and we can really hit the ground running once it does pass. But setting an absolute date, it would be very difficult for the reasons that have already been mentioned. But also, just as we don't know about some of the costs that may arise if we wait very long, of course that's of concern, and we have that same concern. Hence, we do want to do it as quickly as we can. But also, you hear of organizations starting major capital campaigns and we have a recession. So it takes longer than what you had hoped or you expected. So I think we need to understand that we will do our absolute best to raise it as quickly as we can. We want to break that ground as soon as we can, save the town money on the existing properties we're renting. But to set an absolute deadline in a bond would be very difficult.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Eric Belay. I'm a resident of Rockport. As a former banker in this community for many years, I worked on many financing packages for many nonprofits. I would just caution the select board to consider defining what $2 million is. As far as when you say raising $2 million, a pledge is a promise, and until that pledge is turned into cash, all you have is a promise. I caution anyone doing any sort of capital improvement project of this size to not put a shovel in the ground until you've got all of the money to complete the project. I've seen too many cases where a sizable pledge has been made, and because of recession, because of market conditions, that pledge gets pulled back. What you have is you have a hole in the ground, you get a half-finished construction site with no funds to complete it. So when you mention raising $2 million, is that $2 million in pledges or is that $2 million in cash? So if someone's going to pledge over 5 years, those funds could very easily be taken back off the table. So I just want to caution you to articulate that $2 million threshold.
Are you speaking for the article?
I am in favor of the article.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
I'm all for libraries. I love libraries. They're great for kids. They're great for it. But again, I was just, I've seen too often where projects are not funded properly. Thank you.
Rick, you
Yeah,
wanted to speak? I know our lawyer and has talked about this, and also I think Joan can probably answer the question in greater detail. There is a mechanism for making a commitment. There is a mechanism for having a commitment to meet that obligation, and I'm going to let Joan. I'm going to yield to Joan and let her explain that method.
Yes, my understanding, what I have been told, is a pledge is a legal document and then is enforceable. And actually, you can go to the bank and get loans against pledged donations. It is usually in a campaign you do plan for some small erosion of what's been pledged just in case, but we can absolutely make sure of this through legal opinion. But my understanding from the lawyers that I've always talked to, and certainly the campaigns I've worked on over the past, is that it is a legal document and it is considered viable.
And Mr. Chairman, and according to bond counsel, one of her obligations will be to make sure, as bond counsel, that she does not allow us to take the bond until she knows that the money is available there. Her job is, as bond counsel, is to not let us pull the trigger on that bond until she knows that we have all of the funds committed.
And I would say it would be highly unusual to get all of the money in all at once. That's not the practice of a capital campaign. And the common time period is usually 3 to 5 years that people make a pledge, especially if it's a very large pledge, it's paid over a number of years. So I think it would be unrealistic to think that we're going to get that all right away in the beginning. So.
Does anyone else wish to speak in favor of this article? Yes, please come on up.
My name is Will Egana. I live on Spruce Street. And I was going to say that like the $2 million is completely worth the library, because actually someone walked up to my mom the other day and said, why do kids need this new library? They have their school library. And my answer to that question is that, I mean, first of all, school libraries are only open in school hours, and then in my opinion, a library is a place to free read, and school libraries are mostly school-related reading. But I think the $2 million for this library is definitely worth it.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak in favor of this bond article?
Top that one, John. Come on, give it a shot.
Okay, I take it there's nobody else wishing to speak in favor. Does anyone wish to speak in opposition to this bond article? Okay, oh, all right. That's why I pause.
My name is Judith Graham Burgess. I live at 109 Russell Avenue with my husband. We've lived up here for 40 years, mainly summers, but we're getting ready possibly to move here full-time. I'm against this warrant article because I feel like the warrant articles 2 years ago we voted no on, were not followed through on. And secondly, I do not see that warrant Article 8 that we voted on 2 years ago was that we would revise, renovate, add on, do whatever to the current structure. And that has not been paid attention to at all. We have plowed forward without documentation that there was mold, there was a possibility, everybody got scared, but we didn't want to spend the money to research that to see if there was mold. I'm in medicine. If I thought you had cancer and I gave you chemotherapy and you didn't, I'd get my ass suit off. And I have grandchildren that I do homework with, and basically from second grade on, everything is done online. Everything. And I do not think that we need a bigger library. I think the current one could be renovated. Mr. Young is an excellent architect next door. Barn Swallow Books is an excellent example of what's been done. And I am not in favor of this. And I do think if this does pass, and this is going to be a warrant article, that there should be a deadline, because I have worked on fundraising for schools, for hospitals, medical buildings, and we have had people renege, die, something goes on, and not pay. And the money needs to be upfront, I agree with the banker, before we put anything in the ground. Thank you.
Yep. To address one of your little points, this will be on the secret ballot in on the November 8th election. Does anyone else wish to speak in opposition to this warrant article? Come on.
My name is Susan Boyce. I've lived in Rockport for 13 years. I've been in Knox County for 20 years. So I've been in the area. I lived in Camden prior to that. It's not that I'm against a library at all. I think libraries are important. I think I took my children when I lived in Camden to the Camden Library all the time. I think they're great for kids. They offer opportunity for reading that they may not normally be able to do. My concern is about having the town pay the money to fund this library. When I came out of the election this summer, I talked to one of the people on the library committee, and they said, hey, well, are you interested in the library? And I said, yes, I'm all for it, as long as you're not going to raise my taxes. And they said, oh, no, we're going to raise all the money. That's our goal. We're going to raise all the money for this library. So now I come and I hear that now we're asking for $2 million because now we're not going to raise all the money for this library. So that's what I don't understand. Why are we having to pay again? My taxes have doubled since I've lived here. And my assessed value has only gone up 15% on my house. So when I go to sell it, I have this high tax bill, if I ever want to do that. and then I have this assessed value, and people come to look at your house and they go, great house, but I can't afford the taxes because they're so high. And it's a challenge, you know, every year. That's money straight out of our pocket. There's nothing that we actually get back at the end of the life of our house for that. I understand that we get services, and that's great, and I understand that a library is part of that. And you know what? My taxes will go for the maintenance of that library. I get that, but I don't believe that we should be paying the $2 million. I think that this fundraising committee should get innovative. The state of Maine comes after us time and time again for tax money, and we're talking about blood from a turnip. The other thing that this gentleman mentioned is we're getting a new school. I think whether we want to or not, we're going to be getting a new school. Again, out comes the hands for money out of our property taxes. How much is that going to cost us? Has anybody really determined how much this library is going to cost us in our taxes on an annual basis? So my concern is not about the fact that whether or not we have a library. It's the impact to our property taxes and to the value of our homes and everything else. The other thing is, I do think that there should be a limit as to the fundraising time frame that they have to allow to raise these funds. You know, if we let it go for 5 years, as somebody mentioned, the construction cost can increase tremendously. And if we only get pledges and we don't have cash on hand, those construction costs can keep going up and going up. We could be here 8 years from now if people are still trying to raise money. And then who's paying the difference? Is that accounted for in this bond? Are we addressing who's going to pay the difference if the cost is more? So we've said that we're going to give the town $2 million. Who's giving the rest if it goes beyond the budget? I don't think that's addressed anywhere. So that is a major concern there. So those are the concerns that I have. I think, like I said, libraries are great. I'm not against the library. I'm against the fact that we're raising our taxes once again to pay for this. And I did talk to somebody on the committee, and they said their whole goal was to raise all the money. So, you know, I'll go out there and help if I can, but I don't want to have additional taxes. That's my concern.
Brendan, I believe you have a question.
Could I just ask a question? My question is, it would seem to me that you will have an opportunity to cast your vote one way or the other. Do you object to others having an opportunity to cast their votes on this issue in November? This question is really whether or not we put this on the ballot tonight.
I don't think it should be on the ballot. I think that the funds should be raised privately to pay for this, and that you shouldn't be asking the town of Rockport at all for this money.
Okay.
Thank you. You're going to speak against this?
That's
Sorry, it's just a quick clarification. The cost on taxes has been calculated. The average house, median value house in Rockport is $363,400. The cost increase on that house will be $54 per year. So the numbers have been calculated. And you can figure out for yourself what your own tax will be going up. There will be a calculator on the town's website and a connection to it from the library's website as soon as Megan has time to do the programming on it, so that you can put in either your street address to find out your evaluation, or put in your evaluation and find out what the tax raise is.
Okay. Does anyone else wish to speak in opposition to this article? Then I will ask, does anyone wish to speak neither for nor against this article?
Hi, my name is Sue Mondabaugh, and my husband and I have lived here for over 16 years. I certainly am in favor of the democratic process and letting the voters speak their mind, but I think some of the concerns that have been raised that need to be considered is the tax burden on the residents, because as we all know, the entire state of Maine is graying. A lot of us are on fixed incomes, and between the library and possibly a new school, you may be forcing people to leave this area because we can't afford to live here anymore. Thank you.
Alan Mitchell, we're talking about a $4 million project, not a $2 million project, and of which $2 million is supposed to be raised and $2 million paid by the taxpayers. How many square feet in this new building?
9,300, 9,400 has it been? 9,430.
To me, that's a very expensive building, and the town building committee has not been pulled together to even look at this project, nor the capital improvement committee. I have concern about the cost of the building and the size of the 9,000 square foot building. This is pushing well over $300 a square foot, which, what's that?
$425.
What's that?
$425.
$425, which is outrageous. Even though you take into consideration architect's fees and everything else, it's still quite pricey. And the question I have is, who's looking at the specs and the real numbers here? Because a $4 million project for a 10,000 square foot building, even with the site work, which is a little more than normal, and you got some demolition costs, but to me it seems very high.
One of the things to remember is that also includes all the furnishings inside, so it's a turnkey operation. Jen, I'm correct.
Still
on that.
high.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, but
It's still high, and
It may be
I
lower.
agree with others have said here. I own quite a few properties in town, and I just got my tax bills too, and it ain't fun, and this is just gonna make it worse.
Also built into the $4 million is a contingency fee, I think 15? 10%?
as usual.
Yeah, which is a typical.
Tom Murphy, neither for nor against. It's great to see all these people here. It's a good public hearing. There are other public hearings that this town has for recommendations on the warrant articles. A lot of people say that they're just hearing these things for the first time. We had a hearing at the planning board for us to vote for recommendations on a lot of these warrant articles. Jeff Parker was the public at that meeting. There was no other people present. Nobody presented any testimony, neither for nor against, on any of the articles. Please be advised that there are a lot of other committees that have these types of meetings. These public hearings need to be properly attended so that you can hear all of these things. Please attend.
No.
Maybe please attend. It might have been loud, no.
Bob Duke, once again from Hugh Street. I'm standing here saying I'm neither for nor against, but I have to say I'm leaning against. I've lived in this neighborhood since 1970, well, actually since 1957, and I walk by the library twice a day. And it defies logic how anybody would build a 9,300 square foot building where the old one sits. It has, how are you going to do lot coverage? I'm thinking as a planning board member, how are you going to figure lot coverage? How are you going to figure parking? Forget the cost. The cost is a whole other thing. And by the way, we're building 2 schools, not 1, because Midcoast School of Technology needs a school as well. So I'm just not sure how anybody with any common sense would do that. And so my only suggestion to you is don't put the address on that article. Leave the address blank and allow you to build it wherever you want to build it.
Does anyone else wish to speak neither for nor against? Hearing none, we'll close this portion of the public hearing and move to Article 5. Shall the voters of the town of, in this case it would be Rockport, authorize the Board of Directors of the Midcoast Solid Waste Corporation to enter into a contract for up to 5 years to dispose of the municipal solid waste to commence on or about April 1st, 2018, for the fixed price of $57.85 per ton, plus annual increases in the Consumer Price Index, and on such other terms and conditions that the Board of Directors deem appropriate, with Eco Maine, a nonprofit corporation owned solely by the municipalities and located in Portland, Maine, ? We did receive yesterday, I believe, the contract, and that was one of my chief concerns. But I will now open this public hearing, and does anyone wish to speak in favor of this article?
Joan Welsh again. I'm going to put my representative hat on for this part. We've talked a lot about this over the last year, it seems like, months certainly. My committee has been talking about it, the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, for the long time, more than 2 years, 4 years at least. I think this is a very good compromise solution to a project that has great potential but is very iffy at this time. And I think that is the reason that the committee voted as it did to go with Eco Maine for 5 years, to give Fiber Right time to mature and to figure out the problems. I was in a Environment and Natural Resources Committee meeting yesterday with my colleagues, getting a report from DEP on various subjects, and solid waste was one of the subjects. I can't think of one committee member of those 13 members who actually thinks that Fiber Right is really prime time yet. There were a lot of questions we had of the department, but because there is hearing now on the permit, there's an adjudicatory hearing with an appeal of the permit. They really weren't able to talk to us about it at all, really. We had to speak in general terms. But I think there's a lot of concern that there is, especially around financial assurance, that there's really only one letter of, I even believe it wasn't a committed letter, it's a letter of intent from one of the finance people that they're talking to, which is pretty thin, really, when you look at the kinds of assurances that most permits require. So I think this is a good stopgap for us. When we talked about the library and talking about whether or not we have the assurance of the money in hand before we commit to building a library, so it's not going to cost the town a lot more. I think it's a similar kind of wanting to be very sure that the project that Fiber Right is proposing actually really could happen, because if it doesn't, it not only means a lot more of our garbage going to the landfill, which is against the laws of the state now, but also would mean a great amount of cost to the communities that are part of the MRC. So I would urge us to put that on the ballot. Hopefully we can inform the citizens more about it. It's a complex situation, but I think it's important that we move forward with it. So thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone? All right.
Come on. Oh, and I spent far too much time talking about solid waste. Let this one go, honestly. First, I think that this is a process that took a very long period of time for those. I was, before my current employer, I was the town administrator of the town of Hope, and I spent a great deal of time with Rick and Bill and Tracy as member of the Midcoast Solid Waste Board of Directors, looking at this issue. And obviously, as you know, town meeting, I spoke in favor of the article that was proposed at that time. And obviously, Midcoast Solid Waste since then has gone and done a great deal of work and working with the members of the different communities to find an alternative solution, a meeting in the middle, I think. And I think that what you have here is something that probably, had we had more time as a board of directors, we probably should have come around to this in March or April, when saved everyone a whole lot of heartache and time and upset and everything. This allows the best of both worlds. It allows a certain disposal of our solid waste in 2018 and 5 years beyond that at a price that's below what we would be paying at Fiberite, even if things were going well. It gives that 5-year period an opportunity for what all of us, I think, hope is for a process to take off and be wildly successful and find new ways to take our waste and turn it into things that we can't even conceive of right now, and markets for those things. Right now, what we do really well is we take trash and we burn it, and we turn that into electricity. It's a process that we know. It's something that's done all across the world. It's something that people know and are comfortable with. We're not so comfortable with some of the technologies being provided with, or I personally wasn't so comfortable with the technologies being used by Fiberite. I wasn't sure it was going to work. I wasn't sure that come year 1, year 2, that we wouldn't be landfilling trash. And so this allows the best of both worlds. It allows the towns of Rockport, Camden, Lincolnville, and Hope to stick together, to find solutions internally that we can perhaps reduce the amount of waste that we have to ship somewhere, anywhere, whether it's through composting, whether it's through our own diversion efforts at the landfill, whether it's just simply our own management of the facility and trying to find efficiencies from within. We can do all of those things. We can do all those things in 5 years. And we know that in 5 years, we can get out of this we can get out of our agreement with EcoMaine, and we can go join up with Fiberite if things do happen, as we all hope they might. So it really gives the residents of Rockport and all of our 4 communities here as part of Midco Solid Waste the best possible scenario. And so I appreciate the work that's gone into this. There's been a lot of meetings. For those of you, I mean, man, there's so much you wish I didn't know about solid waste that I do now. And it was a hard summer for all the members and all the communities involved in Midco Solid Waste. And so I appreciate the work that's gone into this. I'm not sad that I didn't have to attend all those meetings, but I did watch them all, and I appreciate the work that's gone into find this compromise. So I think I wish you luck, and I hope you all support this in a moment. Thanks.
I'd like to make a couple of clarifications here. Though it's written in the article to be a 5-year contract, the contract we've been given actually says it's 3 years that can be extended for 2 one-year additions. That if necessary, either side could say opt out after the 3rd year, or both agree to continue it on for another year and then another year. Also, as John mentioned here, all 4 towns, Hope, Lincolnville, Camden, and Rockport, have to vote on this, and they all have to approve it so that Midco Solid Waste can sign that contract. That's the way the interlocal agreement that was set up back in the early 90s works. All 4 towns have to approve a contract that extends more than 3 years. So I'll go back now, and does anyone else wish to speak in favor?
Tom Murphy, Rockport. Quick question. You had said at the beginning of the meeting that you will not be making a recommendation on this warrant article. I also assume that would mean that the budget committee would not be making a recommendation on this warrant article.
On this warrant article?
On this warrant article, yes. That said, I am for the project. I think it's a fiscally sound way to dispose of our trash, and should we had the recommendation for the budget committee, as vice chair, I would have voted for and recommended it to the voters.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak in favor of this article? Hearing none. Does anyone wish to speak in opposition to this warrant article? Hearing none. Does anyone wish to speak neither for nor against? Please come on up.
Heaven Bartlett, Budget Committee. So, just like quick questions. If this were to go to the town and we were to again vote no, what happens then? Like, just a horrible situation, fail safe, what happens?
Goes back to Midco Solid Waste Board to come up with another recommendation to the citizens, because as I said, and any one of the four towns could vote against it. It doesn't have to be Rockport, it could be Hope or Lincolnville or any of them. But if all four are not in agreement, then it's back to Midco Solid Waste Board of Directors. Owen and I sit on that board, and come up with another proposal, probably that would go before the voters in June.
And then my other question was that I know you guys have worked super hard, and I really do appreciate the work you've put in. However, we did already vote on this, and it went down. So is, like, what's going on there?
That one was for $70.50 a ton.
It's a 20-year agreement.
And it was a 20-year
Okay.
agreement.
So we're voting on
This is a
something
5-year at a much lower tipping
Okay.
fee.
That,
Yeah.
there you go.
Okay. Does anyone else wish to speak neither for nor against?
I'll bring it up in discussion, but it really wasn't that simple.
Oh.
In terms of the town vote.
Oh, yeah. As I said, does anyone else wish to speak neither for nor against this article? And hearing none, I will close this public hearing. We now move to the new business section, and this is where we will take our final decision and recommendation votes on each of these articles. And
This would be an early meeting.
I would suggest that we do them in order.
Hey, Bill, we
What?
don't have to do anything for School of Technology?
That comes further down. Read the agenda, okay? That's down at the bottom.
It's not part of the public hearing.
It's not part of the public hearing.
Gotcha. I read all the information.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we have to vote to place that on, but that's one of those thou shalt vote to place on the warrant. So, let's start with Article 2, the ordinance entitled the ordinance on the road acceptance. We've had the draft before us for a while, and we have had discussion. We have heard from the public on this, and
I'll make a motion to place Article 2 as presented on the warrant. Do I need the date? For Tuesday, November 8th, 2016 special town meeting.
Second.
moved and seconded. Discussion.
Can I ask for a little education, a little historical background? So
Who
everything
gets
that
to play
I've,
Steve Beveridge?
Yeah.
everything that I've heard so far certainly makes it sound like this road ought to be a town road. That is different from the question before us, which is whether or not this is the right mechanism for making this road a town road. My question is this: is there any other mechanism by which to make this road a town road?
We looked at another mechanism which this board decided against at one time, and the other mechanism was to insert a clause in the road acceptance ordinance stating that subdivisions approved prior to the adoption of this ordinance would be exempt from certain provisions of the ordinance. And the concern with that was that it was a little bit too broad. It might gather some other things in there. And so we looked at this as a way of doing it. The historical reason for the 50% rule was twofold. Number one, that if a subdivision was approved and there were no houses built in it,
I get that, yeah.
that you would have, less tax revenue. And number two, that meant that the subdivision was also going to be undergoing heavy construction. You were going to have a lot of heavy equipment driving over a newly approved town road, which would lead to more repairs later on. So that was the genesis of the 50% rule. And what we tried to do with this was to differentiate the situation between a dead-end street with a cul-de-sac, which doesn't connect to anything else, and this situation. So I'm sure there probably are other ways that we could have done it. This has been knocked around for a while, and this idea kept coming back. So that's my history lesson, I guess.
But I think it's also important to separate the fact that the testimony we heard was about a particular road, and what really is our responsibility is, are we designing a good ordinance? Does the ordinance make sense?
That's
You know?
what's behind my question.
Yeah. So I think I'll opine that I think it's a reasonable ordinance for a reasonable time of economic, not necessarily anything great or anything horrible, but I think we're turning back a little bit a sense of different thought when this was put into.
And I would point out also that this does not remove the requirement that the road be built to the standards of our Section 12.2B Street Design and Construction Standards of the Rockport Subdivision Ordinance. Those provisions still need to be met. And that includes, on this road. So.
The other positive aspect of doing it this way was in the future, and again, not speaking of the particular road in question here, but in the future, to encourage development where roads do connect to one another, instead of having subdivisions where roads are just shooting out in all directions and not going any place, that it improves the walkability and maybe the bikeability for small children and things like that if the roads within a subdivision do interconnect.
And I just wanted to briefly touch on your road, because I've had friends that live on your road. I've talked to a lot of people that live on your road. Come back, try to give us some good ideas. Send an email now. It's not 2013. We'll respond to your email. It's difficult with that road specifically because without major engineering and reconstruction or maybe some cutbacks, it really doesn't fit with the pitch. So I would highly encourage you tomorrow or at the end of this meeting to have your voice be heard and see if there's anything that we can do again to try to work with you and have those concerns worked on, at least in some manner or another. Because I've talked to a lot of people in the subdivision group, and they're very frustrated with it, and it's understandable. It's difficult when a private developer puts in the road, says it's a private road, they can operate with different specs than we can with the public roads. And so it's a difficult one that you've brought up, but, come back to us, please, or send me an email, and we'll work on it. Because I know this doesn't help you, and it doesn't help your neighbors, but man, that's a wicked steep road.
Okay, let's come back to the wording here that is being proposed.
I thought she was due 45 seconds.
Well, I actually, she also, I believe the same citizen also raised some concern that there basically are just sort of an excessively onerous process engendered here by, I think, Section 505. Would any of you guys like to opine again on that?
I think what Section 505 allows us to do, and there is, the only change there is allowing us to consider the recommendations of the fire chief, police chief, and public works director. We don't have to accept their recommendation, but we have to consider it. And that's going to be things like the public works director saying, well, I can't have my guys out there plowing that road safely because of item A, B, C, whether the road is too steep or there's too sharp a curve, things of that nature. The fire chief may come back and say, well, I really would like to have that road accepted as a town road because it'll make it easier for us to get our emergency vehicles up there in a wintertime situation. So that, I think all that blue type in that section is doing is allowing us to hear from the town staff who have to use and drive over that road in the performance of their duties, and letting us know, is it a good idea for the town to accept the road in its current situation?
And we had softened that up so that none of those people got veto power.
Right, they don't
Which
have
is-
veto power. The veto power rests with us or with the select board.
Which is, sometimes in some communities, that is the case, that it can't move forward if the public works director or fire chief or police chief doesn't sign off on it. It can't move forward, which the way it's worded here is it can still move forward. You just have to consider their recommendation. You can disagree with them,
And as I said
Or we're
before,
gonna
this
have-
also
right.
does not eliminate the street design and construction standards of the subdivision ordinance. Those
get-
still
my-
have to be met.
My guess is that if the road was built to the town standards and specifications, that the Public Works Director won't be able to say it's too steep.
Right.
There's not, the Public Works Director could say, I have concerns about the quality of the material that was laid down. The inspection wasn't proper. He can bring all that up, but if it was built to town standards, the Public Works Director is gonna have a tough time saying it's unsafe.
I want to pull, I'm going to be Steve Beveridge here and give us a little history here. Before the road acceptance ordinance was in place, that Sea Light Lane tried to approach the town to have it taken on as a public road because of covenants within their deeds, because of the subdivision. It couldn't be taken on at the time. This was then put in place. And then about, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, they came back to the town because they changed all their deeds and covenants and asked that the town take that on. Well, most of that road meets the standard. It's just at the very end, it goes down at about a 12%, 10 to 12% grade. And that's outside of the standards of the street design and construction standards.
And-
So we couldn't even put it on the warrant.
The next stop is Portugal.
Yeah, just about, well, Blue Hill, Castine, something like that.
Trajectory.
Yeah, so, those provisions still remain. This addresses a specific instance where it may be very well in the best interest of the town to take it on, again, with consideration. And it could be the fire chief comes back and, as you say, we need to have that.
Just to satisfy my own curiosity, where did these standards come from? Did we grab them off someplace else, state,
Which
or?
now, the blue editions?
That's
What- what do you
really a
mean?
No,
stupid question. You should not
Yeah.
be answering that.
Road profile, road cross-section, these grade and pitch?
Yeah, that's engineering stuff
Yeah.
that's been developed and well vetted over the years.
And I was just curious where it ultimately, like,
I imagine a variety of sources.
Yeah. And I think it also, it would not be out of place to editorialize that Rockport wants to have, and the guidance has always been to have perhaps a slightly better built road than if we just took boilerplate from another community. So, but I think Brendan's entirely right that it came from a lot of sources, has been worked on a lot. It's something that, people that care about and know about this stuff and care about Rockport have finessed over the years. So I don't think it's not unimpeachable, but I think it's solid standards.
thank you.
Further discussion?
I just want to make one point in that Section 502 has been struck out, and there was some comment about this being overly onerous. This is a situation where we're trying to make it less onerous. At the time this ordinance was adopted, there was only one time of year when you could actually file to have the road done. We've taken that out so that can happen at any time, or propose to take it out.
So, do we have further discussion? Now, this vote that we're taking here is to place it on the
Motion on
warrant.
the table, yep.
So, and I'm gonna call for the vote. All in favor of placing this on the warrant? That is unanimous. Do we wanna make our recommendation votes at this time?
Yeah, might as well.
Okay.
Fresh in our minds.
Now, this is standard, and it's a land use ordinance, and it's on our charter that we have to do this or can do this. I'm just gonna call and ask, all in favor of recommending this to the voters, putting a yes recommendation on it when it appears on the ballot. If we're not all in agreement, then we will go by name and say your vote yes or no. So, all in favor of yes recommendation? It is on, that one goes on with a yes recommendation. I would point out that the planning board had already voted, and they voted 5, 4, and 2 against. So, let's move to the second, or the third, actually, warrant article 3. Put it, there it is. Do we have a motion to place this on the warrant?
I move to place Article 3 on the warrant for the Tuesday, November 8th, 2016 special town meeting warrant as discussed.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and this is the repeal of the sidewalk construction. Do we have discussion? Owen?
So, first off, I want to take a bit of ownership for the delay in getting it to the Pathways Committee. I had far too many things going on. I was halfway aware of it, but didn't bring it to the attention of the Pathways Committee for the proper time and vetting, so just taking ownership of that. So we talked about it a decent amount yesterday, and I've been looking at it a bit more. The concern that I have is that if we repeal this, because we talked last night, we could repeal this, and we could start anew, and we could submit a new ordinance. But what I'm concerned about is the passing of that new, more in keeping with the times, more appropriate, proper, and robust ordinance passing. I guess I don't have enough experience in knowing if these things typically pass, if these things typically don't, or if it's a crapshoot either way. And so what I'm inclined to do is not want to put this on the ballot and have the Pathways Committee revamp this 3.0, because we already have 2.0 in front of us, and then submit new wording versus repealing it, having us start from the ground up. The one question I do have, though, is about the high sidewalk. And does the language that currently, well, actually, I guess it's two questions. One, does the language that's currently in here prevent us from doing the high sidewalk as the end? No. Okay, that's great.
Oh, no.
Okay, well then my questions have been answered. So,
Budgeted, processed all the way through, yeah.
okay. So
Well, the
that's,
only-
that's my inclination.
Yeah, the only question on that was the site plan review provision. And I guess it was, the ordinance is badly written.
Yep.
And I think this, I guess it was finally determined that the site plan review didn't apply for whatever reason, and I don't remember what the reason is. I'm actually a little more concerned about Summer Street, because there are gonna be stairs in that sidewalk, which means it's not handicapped
Handicap
accessible. And, I mean, the reality is, that's a steep hill. And so, I'm gonna, I mean, I think leaving the ordinance untouched is a bad idea, because there's so many things in here that are, if you're leaving it untouched, you're putting back in all the stuff that's crossed out, and
Right.
taking out all the red. If we don't do anything, it goes back to that. And I think that there are so many things in here that are not up to date, that are not current, and that in some cases are bad policy, that we're better off taking it off the books and then moving forward with something new, should the Pathways Committee decide to recommend something new. I don't think that taking this ordinance off the book is gonna hinder sidewalk construction over the next year or two. I don't necessarily think that keeping it is gonna promote sidewalk construction over the next year or two.
The reality is, most people didn't know it was existing.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
So that was actually the gist of my question, Ken, and you've obviously been in the front lines because you rewrote a lot of it. What's the downside if, as you see, you characterized it at one point as people ignored it? And if people have ignored it, which I'm not really in favor of, fire. I'm not really no, emergency, I shouldn't say fire in a crowded room. What's the downside of keeping it for the next session, and then does that as a bad thing where you have energy in the ORC and your own that says this is bad? If you had that energy and you were looking to make a new one,
Amend it.
yeah, does having it in place still and us not putting it on the warrant article, not putting the warrant article on the ballot, does that put any more impetus to writing something that's appropriate in 2016?
19, really?
Yeah, 19.
I mean, I think before we had ignorance as our our reasoning
All right.
for not knowing it. We don't have that anymore, and so if we leave something on the books that's bad, I don't think that's good policy.
Even with the knowledge that, and I can't obviously speak for the Pathways Committee, but knowing those folks for a while, I believe that they would buckle right down and get you language to propose as the new amended ordinance versus repeal. And again, I don't know if these things are a Herculean task to get passed, or, and with that as a backdrop, if it is, I would prefer to keep it on the books with the knowledge that we will substantially rewrite and amend this ordinance, but to keep the ordinance on the books temporarily. I mean, it, untouched, as it stands untouched, yes, it's an old archaic bit of language, but we've already reworked it 2.0 and we'll rework it 3.0 to be appropriate and in fitting with where we want to go, but.
To answer your question about what's the likelihood of
Yeah.
it passing, my experience here has been that if it is recommended by the select board, it passes.
Yeah, so is fiber.
That was a budgetary issue, not a land use
Just saying,
ordinance
just
issue. Okay, this is a land use ordinance issue. And we empower the ordinance review committee to develop them using common sense and best practices. I would put to you that if we repeal this and the Pathways Committee can come back and say, you know, here's a draft ordinance that I think will make your life a lot easier, address the things that Jeff Scott had mentioned. But keeping in mind that the ordinance review agenda session, or the beginnings of it, is next Thursday. And just putting this on as, we want a new sidewalk ordinance that fits in with the needs of the town, can be worked on over the winter and brought back to us in April to be put on the June warrant. Particularly as you said, the Pathways Committee can buckle right down and come up with a good, well-crafted ordinance, which would take a lot of the effort off of the Ordinance Review Committee. So, does that massage your fear or your worry?
I do agree that the language in here is old. And I guess I just don't see the worth in asking the voters to repeal something that we're gonna propose to them in a year or so with new language when another mechanism exists, which is to amend this ordinance, and so to keep it on the books, because if there is no adverse effect to the town and sidewalk construction for the next year, we'll get new language in there and make sure that the new language is vetted through and then just propose that it's amended.
Well, I think one thing we need to keep in mind too is the fact that the Pathways Committee spent an awful lot of time working on the sidewalk master plan for Rockport, Sidewalk and Pathways Master Plan, and this board then looked that over and approved it, and there's an awful lot of good stuff in there which is gonna act as a guideline. Yes, it's not codified as an ordinance is, but it's guidelines, and I think that's a good document that we can use over the interim period before we enact another ordinance, if we decide to enact another ordinance. And there's some question as to, what do we need to codify in an ordinance? And that's something I think that the Ordinance Review Committee needs to look at. But I think intentionally leaving something on the books that we know is, and it's not just a minor issue, there's a lot of things that are not consistent with this ordinance.
We haven't had this document in front of us for more than, 6 months? When Will unearthed it? So, I understand, I agree with what you're saying. My concern is just its ability to be repassed. And if I was a citizen and I see repeal of an ordinance, 12 months later, passing of a new ordinance, I would just be a little confused if I saw amending it to be more appropriate for the time and date, I would be more inclined to approve the amended version than repeal and then replace.
And while I could easily fall totally into your camp, let's adopt the stance that we will do. Let's adopt the stance that our citizens are relatively smart and they read most of the citizens read this stuff, and give them the benefit of the doubt. But at the same time, because the work that the Pathways Committee has done is not codified, then I think that if we were to, as a board, put this on the ballot to repeal this and go for a while without any sidewalk guidance, that we then turn around and make clear to the planning board that we would be very happy for them to follow as much as they can the existing recommendations, more current recommendations from the Pathways Committee. Now, if they come up against any sort of resistance, they're gonna, an appellant is gonna say, it's not, I don't have to follow that, and they're gonna say, yeah, but I think if we don't have this, then we should at least make it clear that, that we're looking to the future, and we want, in the interim, we want the Pathways Committee master plan to be one of the guiding principles.
What do you think?
In terms of an applicant, I mean, there's nothing in this ordinance that would apply to it's all directing the town to do things. There's nothing in here, I don't think, that would apply to an applicant for any.
Except to make them pay for it.
Well, but that's a voluntary.
It's a voluntary
thing. That's the construction by petition,
Yeah,
which has
yeah.
never
Yeah.
been
Which,
invoked, and
yeah,
I don't
that's-
think ever
it
will
isn't
be.
gonna happen, yeah.
So I don't know that there's anything there that's gonna impact an applicant to the planning board.
Brendan?
It strikes me as semantics. It needs to be fixed, let's fix it. And I think if we put this on the ballot, we're creating 2 steps to fixing it. If we don't put it on the ballot, we have 1 step.
I guess I would submit that we would be better off sweeping the slate clean and allowing the Pathways Committee, the Ordinance Review Committee, and maybe with input from the Planning Board to write something without having to look at what's already there, which is in many ways inadequate.
I remind you that Planning Board has representatives on the Ordinance Review Committee. Do we want to entertain comments from, in this case, the Planning Board?
Or maybe the Pathways Committee Chair?
We have a Planning Board member back there that had his hand up to speak.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend to the board that you put it on the warrant to remove the ordinance as it stands, because keeping bad law in the books is just bad policy.
Okay, thank you. Did the Pathways Committee want to have anything to say here?
This is a wish upon a star, I think. I wish we could say, here's the ordinance that we'd like to replace the current ordinance with, rather than saying, let's edit the current ordinance. That's my wish. Is that not possible to say we're gonna get rid of this ordinance and replace it with this? You can't do that in one step?
No.
Well, we can't because we don't have the new ordinance in front of us right
But
now,
if
but I
we
think
had-
Understood.
that repealing this
Understood.
one is the first step to doing exactly as you suggest.
You'd have to repeal it and replace
I
it.
think that's what we have to do, I'd say.
I think to Brendan's point is that
I just don't.
I'm entirely happy.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we all are. We could vote either way and walk out of here happy, but is a step mean a point of jeopardy? I think that's.
That's my only concern,
Right.
because literally, I can agree that we could wipe everything from Title I out and then start anew. The only concern that I have, and I agree having a bad law on the books is bad policy, but the jeopardy of it not getting passed in the future is a concern. That's my only, and I mean, I'm inclined to agree with the chairman of the Pathways Committee, but just any way of minimizing what is a good overall thought from not being passed again with better language within it is a concern. And the two-step, and I mean, literally, we could wipe all of it and start anew, but keep it on the books, let us work on it, and at least then it's just one step, like Brendan was saying.
Well, but I'll disagree with that and say, if you're concerned about a new ordinance passing, then you're gonna be concerned about a new ordinance passing whether we've repealed this one or not in the future. And if we have a concern, if a new ordinance doesn't pass, then we're stuck with this one.
Yeah. And if we keep this one and say we're gonna wipe it out from title all the way down to the end and put in something completely new, that still has to go back to the voters for a vote. And they could turn that down, which leaves us still with a bad, as you said, bad law.
It's been my observation that if this board does a good job of explaining stuff, the town makes good decisions.
Well, and it's gonna be, the Pathways Committee is gonna have input, the ORC is gonna have input, and so by the time it gets
half
back
the
to
town right
back
there.
to the voters, it's gonna be.
Another member of
Yeah.
the Pathways Committee.
Helen Shaw, since I'm the one that's writing this,
I'll help this time, Helen, I promise.
I can tell you what the process is going to be. If this is repealed, what you'll get back is, instead of lines through and red, you'll get just clean type. Plus, it would be extremely helpful to actually have the input from the Ordinance Review Committee first on, I'm sure they've seen all of the red and the strikeouts and everything, so that I know exactly what I need to address and how it needs to be addressed before we bring a new text back. But it's not a matter of starting from scratch. I will start with what you've got right here. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would have you work with the liaison to see, it sounds almost like the ORC would rather that they just be presented in whole cloth, with a new
Right.
document.
Right, but
rather
it's
than
going
looking-
to be basically what's here until we know what they want, what they find a problem with. I can't change any of this if I don't know what their problem is.
Chicken,
Ready for a
egg?
vote?
Yeah.
Okay, we've worked our way all the way through this. So the first question is going to be to put it on the warrant, yes or no. All in favor of placing it on the warrant? That's a 5-0 vote, it's on the warrant. Now, this is again the recommendation, and I will ask for a show of hands on recommending yes to the voters. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, we have to go by name now. So this is going to be roll call, yes or no answer. Casas?
No.
Reardon?
Yes.
Parker?
Yes.
Kinley?
Yes.
Chapman, yes. So it's a 4-1-0 recommendation. We now go to the library warrant, or the library bond warrant.
I'm gonna move to place Article 4 on the warrant as presented in the original public hearing notice, and that is without the deadline date.
Second.
Let him finish his
And,
motion.
for the special town meeting warrant, Tuesday, November 8th, 2016, and all that other folderol.
Second.
Okay, it is moved and seconded in the original wording. Discussion.
I want to thank the people who spoke on this, because the deadline date was something that came up at a previous meeting and thought it might have some merit, so we explored it. But I think the people who spoke, particularly those who are going to be doing the fundraising, spoke clearly enough that would be a hindrance to them rather than a help. And so I'm thankful to them for doing that, and I would proceed on that basis.
Okay.
I would just add, and I also didn't support the deadline concept, but I thought it would be worth, the people who are still here hearing that the one person who I heard advance this idea, and I'm paraphrasing, and so I apologize, but it was something to the effect of, I support the library, this library, but I want a library soon more than I want this library. So it wasn't a subversive, way of blocking it, and that's a rational concept to me. But like others, I'm convinced that it's not a helpful mechanism.
Owen?
I said in the beginning, as long as we go halvesies, Seems okay with me. And I apologize for whatever information. I had never heard a statement from anyone that said that it was going to be complete private fundraising. So I apologize that you've gone this long operating with that information. It's not anything that I had heard. So sorry that you had to go this long thinking that.
You know, I think it's important to point out a couple of, these things are worded by the lawyers, and you start banging your head against the wall halfway through reading it.
It's one sentence.
Better than the
It's
last
one
one.
sentence.
Better than the last one was.
But it's important to point out something about the numbers, and that is that what we're approving, what we're asking, if we put this on, what we'll be asking the town members to approve is to appropriate a sum not to exceed $2 million for the bond. And also that will be matched by fundraising of at least $2 million. So if the fundraising committee is very successful and is able to raise $2.5 million, and if we send the bids out, once the architects get the final plans done, and the bids come in for the new library at $3.5 million, which is a lower per square foot cost, then we will bond only $1 million. And so we're protected on the high end for the bonding piece, and we're also expecting, we're not going to go forward until we meet that low end of the fundraising total. So it's hard to read with all the legalese, but I want to make sure that everybody understands what's being placed in front of them.
I just want to say that I respect and value people's decisions and to not support this process for financial reasons. So much work has gone into this process, and it strikes me that a lot of people have had an awful lot of opportunity to make their feelings known about this, that to me it would feel highly obstructionist to not let the largest number of people cast a vote on this.
A couple weeks ago, I made a very strong statement that I felt that it was in best interest to hear from our voters. Part of our town structure is that the legislative body of the town are the voters, not us. We just recommend things to those voters. And if we don't recommend it, we can't hear from them. So, any other discussion on this? So the motion is as originally presented on the public hearing notice. With that, I will call for the vote to place it on the warrant. All in favor? That motion carries. Now for the recommendation, yes or no. All in favor of a yes recommendation to the voters? That is also a 5-0 vote. We now move to the Article 5, or the fourth warrant, on the Eco-Maine contract. And, as I said, that all four towns are gonna need to approve this.
Oh, we're just getting started.
And if we don't,
Don't leave. It's so much fun. We got trash. It's trash.
can you?
I move to place Article 5 as presented on the special town meeting warrant for Tuesday, November 8th, 2016.
Do we have?
Second.
Second. The budget committee is moving into the green room or upstairs? In the green room.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is a public meeting. The public is welcome at our deliberations also.
Trying to steal our audience, huh?
That's half our audience. Half. I want to extend a thank you for those of you who are staying.
And to everyone who came.
Okay, all right. We have the motion and the second to place Article 5 on it. There's one editorial correction that I want to make to the wording that was on the public hearing notice, and that is I want to remove the parenthesis that appears before the word Rockport and to strike the comma after Rockport, as well as Camden, Hope, and Lincolnville, and the end parenthesis. It's only our town that is going to be actually voting on this one. The other towns will have wording almost identical, just the name of their town will change.
Understood.
So,
Now, are you going to change 5 years to 3 years since that's the contract we have, or do we keep it at 5 years?
That was the motion made. It really does go for 5 years.
I understand that.
But we have termination points after
It says
3 and 4.
up to 5 years
Yeah.
is accurate.
Yes, and it's up to.
Yeah, it does say up to, so that's okay.
Yep. Of course, under 3, we wouldn't have to vote on it.
But it isn't.
Sure.
Right, no, I get that. I get
Yeah.
that.
Okay, further discussion?
Ay.
You know I was opposed to this. I think Owen was as well. We owe it to our residents to allow them to have their say. And, you know,
Oh, I think definitely it should go on the ballot.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's my
You want
point.
to get through that one first?
Well, in this one, we can't put a recommendation on.
This
that.
one we
Oh.
cannot put a
Yeah, right, right,
recommendation
right.
on.
So if you want to do your recommendation, you got to do it in your discussion now.
Yeah.
Do you also feel that what Bill just said, or?
I mean, the only thing I would do is hash out again a debate that we had at a lot of different meetings. I would attempt to correct or dive deeper into things that Joan or John said, but the reality this is the new reality. After I got over my temporary huffiness, yes, keeping the corporation together is an extremely important thing. I'm not super jazzed about it, but it is what it is. We tried, didn't work out so well. It's all good. But like I said from the beginning, EcoMain's not a bad option. I just thought that we had a better one, but now I'm just hashing out the same stuff that I said at a lot of different meetings. So let's move forward into the future, where the future lies.
I think the 5-year contract allows things to develop a little bit more.
Yep.
There was a news item today, actually, I don't know how many saw it, that EcoMain had just started an agreement about organic waste.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
have an agreement
Yeah, I
with
heard
Exeter.
Want to hear another news article that went out? DuPont is doing these anaerobic enzymes, and they're kicking much
course they
bottom, and they're making sugar look like an easy thing to make. So, just saying.
Well, and I
Sugar's
think
where it all starts.
Keeping the 4 towns together and allowing things to evolve over the next 5 years is a reasonable option. The cost, the financial end of it is quite reasonable, and so I'm okay with it.
Now, yeah, I want to address the idea of keeping the corporation together. Until we take a vote to dissolve it, it stays together because it is the transfer station. The interlocal agreement that was signed 20-some years ago, 25 years ago, mandates that we deal with the landfill. And we're going to have to deal with that, whether we continue as part of the transfer station or not. But to be able to rescind that would be another long process. So somewhere along the line, all 4 towns have to come into an agreement on how to handle their trash. And I hope it is done before March 31st, 2018. But, you know, if one town or more towns put this down, we just go back to the drawing board and come up with something else. You know, I think this is probably the best financial deal that we're gonna have. They went into the green room. You know, the best, this is far better than the financial option that was given us back in June, which was a 20-year, and it's starting at $70.50 a ton.
Right.
You know, this gives us, and, you know, if we want, we can then continue to extend this on. It would be a different contract, but it would continue to extend beyond that, or we could go somewhere else. Who knows? Maybe Perk is back open and running. I don't know. I'm just, you know.
Take me now, Lord.
Yeah. So,
So
that's-
I think it's clear that it has to go to the voters. I think it is an interesting opportunity for us to present Rockport's Rockport's view as a leader in being perhaps more innovative. And if the town folks decide that we can do better in our choices, then the town would vote that way. But clearly it has to go to the voters. So, and that's the only thing on the table tonight.
Do we?
So I'm ready to raise my hand.
Any further discussion?
Let's do it.
Then all in favor of placing this article on the November warrant? That is unanimous, and as I said, we don't make a recommendation on this. If it were on the June town meeting warrant, that would be a different issue. So, we now move to setting the polling hours, and I would entertain a motion on that.
Where was that line?
2 seconds.
Move to set the polling hours for Tuesday, November 8th, 2016, special town meeting from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. in the Rockport Town Office Richardson Room.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on this? All in favor of declaring this? And we will sign this at our Monday meeting, correct?
Says
Oh.
we have to vote to sign it.
Oh, okay,
I don't think you have it in there.
but we don't, it's not in this packet for signatures.
You're just voting
We
to
just
sign it.
sign it on
Right.
Monday.
You can just,
Yeah. We can vote to sign
and
it.
then sign it, right?
So, okay.
So do you want a motion to sign it? Do we-
Oh, you're right. No, I was still on the first one. You're right. We now need the motion to sign the warrant.
I move to sign the Tuesday, November 8th, 2016 special town meeting warrant.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any discussion? We will have it before the physical document for signatures on Monday. And that's what, about 29 of them?
Maybe 6.
Oh, 6. Huh? Okay, all in favor? We have effectively signed. And now the Midco
Sign
Song.
the Tuesday, November 8th, 2016 Region 8 Midco School of Technology referendum warrant and notice of election.
And that we have here.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. It is just,
Do we have any?
We don't have any leeway.
We don't have any leeway.
we have no leeway, but at the same time, we don't even know how much we're on the hook for.
25 mil, some percent of some percent of
25 mil. but We don't know.
Another 25.
Yeah.
How big
There,
we go.
there are a couple of people who are going to care about that.
And actually, it comes down through the CSD because the well,
I just
yeah.
got the,
Oh, what do you get?
I got an email about it this morning.
Ma'am,
Oh, is
but
that it?
it's-
I don't think it's out there.
Oh.
You can look at mine.
Is this another thing that's gonna raise our taxes?
Not classified.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it will.
That's what that other two ones
A
started,
lot.
I'm like, I didn't even know about this one.
Well, it's spread over like 19
Total cost is
communities.
Yeah,
$25
but it's
million,
still
but we
substantial.
don't yet know what
So
the
we get
Rockport
hit hard.
burden
Yeah, we get hit
of that
hard.
will be.
It's
It's a,
split between all those towns, but it's a broke out percentage by population.
Oh, let me see.
No, it's
It's
Or-
it's a
it's
very
more population,
complicated.
it's more
Very
complicated than that.
complicated.
Yeah, yeah.
It's extremely complicated.
Do you have something, Rick?
I do. I just got it this morning from Betsy Saltonstall.
Oh. Oh, yeah, she's on the, yeah, she's on the school board, that's right.
Keep in mind that the, is this it? No, I just have to.
do you know where that building is in Rockland?
It's all the way at the south end of Main Street, just before you go into Owl's Head.
Just past the steam sale and
Yes.
whatever museum.
Right.
Let me just see if I can find what Megan did a
Like
recalculation
a
on
lightning
it.
bolt or something on this sign, doesn't it?
It looks
There-
just like an industrial.
the
it
original-
is an industrial building.
The original calculation they gave us was based on the previous, based on a previous valuation and our previous mill rate, which has changed. And it was at $19.15 per $100,000 in value. And,
That was the previous?
that, yes, and the new.
Our share.
Yeah.
Our share, it jumps up with the new value and the new mill rate to $19.68 per $100,000 in
that's-
value.
Divide
just
that
cents.
by 100, and so it's 19 cents on the mill rate.
It's $19.68 on the mill rate.
19 cents, not $19.
Man, and I really want this to go through, but.
Well, we don't have any
You
choice.
don't have any
We
choice.
Yeah,
gotta
no,
sign
I
it.
just mean generally speaking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And even though it's money related, we don't get to make a recommendation. So, with that, I'm gonna call for the vote to place it on the warrant. All in favor? It's on the warrant. We need to sign this. This is 5 items here, 5 of them, so. Do we have anything further?
Move to adjourn.
I am armed.
Second.
All in favor? It's
My love.
unanimous now. Start signing.
It's a record.
Allowed to raise your left hand?